course, people can have really deeply intimate, non-physical, non-sexual relationships. But for us, there were so many layers from the church that we were just like, I'm like, do I even hold hands with you in public type of thing?
There was another person in the relationship that was
Jesus.
Yes. Hey everyone, it's another episode of Uncoupling, and on the program today we have Alyson Stoner.
Hi.
She's an actor. She's a producer. I'm going to not miss a beat of this. She's also an author and a mental health advocate, and she's the co-founder of the Movement Genius, which provides mental health tools and stress relief techniques. And she is also a fellow podcaster. They are also a fellow podcaster called Dear Hollywood, which is out now.
Woo woo.
And if I mess up pronouns, don't come at me. I will be correcting myself. Everyone gets mad, man.
It's a safe space here.
This is a safe space. But congrats on your podcast.
Thank you. Thanks.
Do you want to give us a lowdown of what's going on there, Dear Hollywood?
Yes. So Dear Hollywood podcast is essentially breaking down this toddler to train wreck pipeline, as I call it, which is seeing all of these former child actors end up dealing with these mental health issues, or even going as far as choosing to end their own lives. And I wanted to see, is there a reason that this happens almost like copy and paste every generation? So I started researching. I started talking to child development experts. I have my own personal experience growing up in Hollywood at the age of 7. And so we put it together to sort of expose all of the different variables that go into being a kid performer. And it's intense, but it's also very informative. And the first season is out, and the second season will be, I believe, this summer.
Okay, congrats. I feel like there's also like pageants, like
Yes.
Obviously the famous case of like JonBenet Ramsey, you know, of that mentality. I wonder if there's crossover with like from actors to different types of child performers.
Absolutely, right. Yeah. So like high-performing children could also technically encompass
even
academics
sports.
And sports.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we're starting with the niche, that I have expertise in, but we have comments from people all over the world who are like, wait, this was my childhood. And they were, a chess champion, or they were a gymnast. So, yeah.
Well, I love the title. Dear Hollywood is really fun.
Yeah.
It's intriguing.
It is. It's a very personal podcast for sure. So
well, check it out, guys. Everywhere you get podcasts?
Everywhere. You
get podcasts. Well, that's from one very deep, somewhat traumatic, topic that needs to be unpacked. Welcome to Uncoupling. Another, a dense topic that we say there's this stigma. The reason we started this podcast, one of the reasons, is that we say social media is like the easy grab where everyone has sort of the photo book of the fairy tale coupledom and the path that they have in their relationship, and all of a sudden there's just a ghost in town, and sometimes there's even retroactively pictures taken down, and there's this stigma that if a relationship doesn't work out, it's failure.
Right. Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on, because we were just talking off camera, that social media is a place that it's not like I've done it consciously, but I've never posted a relationship, and you share the same experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a number of reasons. And one is that I've already had every part of my life in the public eye. So that's been one area that's felt so internal. And also, yes, the impermanence of it. If something doesn't work, there's been that pressure that it was a failure. And so I kind of avoided sharing people I loved with the world, I think, subconsciously. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't have known this at 20 years old, but now in my 30s, I'm so grateful that I had experiences that were shorter term, and the lessons that were learned, and the, parts of ourselves that we uncovered because we got to meet multiple people. And I would have never thought that way, because I also was heavily involved in the church where, at 18, I didn't even date until I was, I think, 18 or 19. And I thought, I'm only going to date for marriage. And I was with my first boyfriend for a year. And at the year mark, he was like, let's celebrate. And I put on my thinking cap and was like, well, if we're not going to get married, then we should probably call it off right now at the year mark. Like, that was so sad, and so unintentionally harsh of me instead of celebrating. But I was of the mindset, like, if this is not my forever person, then why would we go even deeper and make it even more painful later?
So much pressure.
So, and now, I'm like, oh, this is a beautiful little short, 2 months
What did he say? Did you communicate that at the time?
Yes,
and
yes.
What did he say?
He was so kind and so caring. And I think I recognized that I was already in a place where I was second guessing if this would be something I wanted forever. And so
you already felt it.
Yeah. So it pivoted more towards, okay, let's explore what it means to break up and all the shame that came with that.
Was he upset or was he pretty understanding?
I think he was fairly understanding. And also, again, I didn't know that I was queer yet. And so I don't think I really opened up to him in the way that I did once I was in queer spaces with people who I felt fully seen by. Parts of my heart with him were just not yet even cracked open. In a way, I say he kind of helped love me to life because I was so offline.
So he was a huge blessing.
Yeah, he was a really lovely human.
Love you to life.
And we were also so quote unquote pure about things. Like, we weren't physically intimate, so we didn't have that added layer of that kind of connection point.
Just such baby pretend love.
Yeah, we of course, people can have really deeply intimate, non-physical, non-sexual relationships, but for us there were so many layers from the church that we were just I'm like, do I even hold hands with you in public type of thing.
There was another person in the relationship that was
Jesus.
That was yes. Yes.
And we only, quote unquote messed up a few times in different ways. And then actually that was where I was like, wait, if we're going to, start getting into this territory, then I really need to think about my future and am I making this forever decision? It's amazing how much a mind can change.
It is amazing.
And I'm grateful for neuroplasticity because I have a whole different paradigm now.
That is so funny to look back and it's wild.
So innocent and also really scared of doing the wrong thing. And not listening.
I just keep thinking pressure in my mind.
Yeah.
For such a young person.
Listening to my body either, right? Because I couldn't at that time trust any of my own desires. The view of my body was it's to be kind of put in its place and disciplined.
How did you uncondition so many things that were put into your brain after that breakup? How did you, I guess, you said, on your queer journey, how did that unravel after that?
There were a lot of steps, and it was very slow. And I consider myself a late bloomer pretty much across all areas because I operated from such a people-pleasing and fearful standpoint. I think fellow actors sometimes understand this. We walk into a room and we're trained to figure out what you need from me, and then we are the chameleon and we adjust to accommodate. And I kind of had that orientation to life in all my relationships.
No is not an option. It's what kind of yes do you need?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think I was so nervous about doing the wrong thing that I really stifled parts of myself. It was willful denial as well for a long time. But at the same time, I'm the researcher type. So I'm okay, let's read all the books. Let's ask mentors and get more feedback. Again, kind of an actor thing where you're I'm about to play this role, and how can I most authentically bring them to life? Let me study
case studies.
Exactly. So
I was all the different kinds of case studies. Yes. I'm going to go interview them. I'm going to jot some notes down.
Yes.
That I'm not even going to admit I took notes on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was really a slow transition, and of course, I had a lot of thoughts and feelings, but I also had never acted on them either. So that was its own learning curve. And I finally understood what people meant when they described having a crush. I wasn't until my 20s when I was like, oh, I feel like I'm 11 and a puppy. And these feelings feel so odd to have as a 20-year-old because I'm like so giddy and what's happening in my body. And then second, like when they described, these are the urges of wanting to be close with someone or to, caress their hair or like physical intimacy. I had never felt that impulse before until being in a queer relationship. And I was like, oh, I'm not asexual.
Yeah. That's quite the revelation.
Well, and when people would be like, I'm so intimidated to talk to guys, and I'd be like, I don't know why, but they don't scare me at all. Talking to a woman?
It was much.
Oh my gosh.
What were some of the differences? I mean, everything was different, obviously.
Yeah.
But would you say because you had dated both genders, what differences?
So many.
So many. Because
many.
The reason I ask this question is I'm thinking, someone's going through a breakup, maybe questioning the same things that you were. How would you, what are your, if you had to put it in a numerical sense, like at the top 3 tips or the way to transition of different expectations,
Like if you're
how
wanting to
things are
start
different.
dating someone else or people of different identities. Well, of course, every human is going to be so individual, and I'm not a clinical expert on any of this.
Yeah.
But I think we do have to acknowledge that we're all socialized in certain ways. So based on different identity markers, as someone who's socialized as a woman, I inherited, and I didn't mean to, a sense of meekness and a sense of like, well, I'll defer to the man in the room. And also, I'll even beautify myself in a way that I think he'll find attractive. And I'm hoping to be chased by him or pursued. And this is just one version, of course, of how the story can unfold.
And did you have these intentions and did you have those thoughts even though it wasn't your authentic self? Like you found yourself playing the role.
Yeah, it was totally performative.
Right.
And not to say that there couldn't be an honest version of that or someone who genuinely prefers that and values it. But for me, it was so inauthentic. And so I never, it just didn't, it felt like I was wearing a mask. Yeah.
But what's so funny is I would consider myself mostly a straight person. And I still get annoyed by the performative aspect of it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I still don't want to do those things.
Right.
Because I'm too lazy to do those things.
Yeah.
And I'm just not, I don't like to feel uncomfortable. So if it's like wearing heels or wearing something tight, the second the audition's over, I take it off and put something loose on because you're just more physically comfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, how are people comfortable in tight clothing? Some people are.
Maybe.
I really do believe some people are.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you were saying like, yes, it was performative, but I still did it. And so to know someone's out there that could say, hey, just because I'm doing this doesn't necessarily mean it's something I should be doing or it comes to me naturally.
Yeah. And also, it's, I think remembering your choice and autonomy in it, I didn't realize there were other options. Like, for example, I later, dated men who had a much more expansive view of manhood and who were far more emotionally attuned to everyone in the room than I was taught could be an expectation. And so, of course, like human beings are so much more multidimensional than we give each other credit for. But in my case, an additional element was, there's also a sense of gender identity and biological sex and sexuality that like I feel more seen, more myself, and more fully online when I'm with someone who typically, not always, but typically is not a straight cis man.
Right.
Not to say that I haven't been with men since. And that has its own layers. And so, there's a lot of ways that I think when you're queer – sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. it might just be that I'm queer, so I feel this way, and that's my bias. But I'm like, the second I was in a queer relationship, it was hard to fathom returning to being with a straight cis man.
That's a really honest answer, though. That's just the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how you know something's right.
Yeah. Like
when you settle into it and you're like, oh, that fits. Great. There we go.
And this is not anything against men, right? Like that's the beautiful thing here is like, great. So I'll go be with the peeps that we're attracted to each other and y'all go be with each other and everyone can
it's all groovy.
Find their person.
Yeah. That's a nice fit though, because I think for people that are questioning after a breakup and they're like, what was wrong with that breakup? And you have people in the public eye that are in their 30s and 40s that have these revelations. Mm-hmm. And of course, the internet comes down on them of like, I knew it. I saw it in that person.
Right.
And it's interesting that other people can see something in you that it was so buried.
Yeah.
So it could take so many relationships
to
find an authentic path. And I'm not going to call any particular actors out, but it's like
right.
I just find it so interesting from a psychological and sociological standpoint of not necessarily the internet coming down on a particular public figure, but more about that public figure's internal journey of like what would they who was raising them. They're so woke to begin with.
Yeah.
Why did certain parts of their life?
Yeah.
And it's more of like a empathy. It's an empathetic feeling for that person's internal journey.
Yeah. I mean, to build off of that, I think sometimes, people are truly discerning parts in us that we can't see ourselves yet. But I think there's also a way that people are projecting sort of like the stereotypical version of something onto someone and going, wait, for example, when people, said, we knew you were queer to me,
what was your reaction?
They were like, because you were athletic, because you were a tomboy, and they named these very stereotypical things that I thought like, that's not where my felt sense of sexuality lives in my body. In fact, being from the Midwest, like there were so many straight women.
We were all in sports.
Yeah, everyone played sports and everyone had dirt under their fingernails in the summertime outside playing. Like, so that didn't quite register, but I understood where they were coming from. They were using the stereotype that they had been exposed to of like, oh, these things equal this other, thing. So I think there is some ways where like calling what you see in someone else also has to be checked.
Yeah, it's like, is it coming from these external like easy gets, or is it like they're seeing something there,
right? And it could,
and we don't know.
Both.
Yeah,
right.
It could be both. Totally.
And then also, I think there's something about I didn't know different parts of myself until I dated people with different personality types, different upbringings. And it wasn't like I was intentionally trying to hide them. I just had never been in a dynamic where that part came online that hadn't been activated yet. So I think there's something to say about, keeping an open mind and letting yourself be a human in progress and someone who's evolving over time and doesn't have to have a fixed sense of self. Mind you, none of us do anyway, but I think we like to cling to certainty and pretend this is who I am, this is who I'm not. When in reality, as we get more information, as we share experiences, we're constantly being shaped. There is a malleability, a fluidity to who we are, over periods of time. So I think in relationships, like I was finally with someone, for example, who could financially provide for themselves when I realized, I guess in all of my previous relationships, I've kind of been the provider.
The person. Yeah.
Now, granted, I was also younger, so people were still establishing themselves in their career when I started at 7. So I knew like, okay, there's going to be some mismatches here, maybe. But then I was with someone who that wasn't even a factor because they were completely financially secure. And it brought out this other part of me where I was like, oh, they're able to, do sweet things for me that cost money that I would normally feel so guilty about. But I know that this is an expression of their care and I can receive it without thinking about how I'm going to pay them back.
Right.
And it was just, it was a new part of myself. So
that you get to take a back seat and you don't have to do anything. And you're like, this is a thing? This is real?
and of course, like it was still very, very mutual, but I just hadn't had that kind of mutuality before.
Yeah. It's a different feeling.
Yeah.
I know what you mean by that. I am of the belief that you pay 50-50 on a first date, which has hurt and helped me in both ways, and that I just ideologically believe in that. We were talking about, before we started the recording, we talked about, these are strangers on first dates. Like, why would you have to like feel the need to cover them? And but I will say it's kind of bitten me in the butt down the road because I found myself always carrying too much of the burden. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Why isn't there this middle ground of egalitarian aspects of, okay, the person pays half, I pay half. And it can just be that symbiotic, like, give and take.
Yeah.
It always tends to fall, like, when they do let, at least in a man-woman situation of, if a man does let a woman pay, why it almost falls too heavy on the other side. And it was so wild to me. I'm like, wait, why isn't there this middle ground? It's weird that it falls one way or the other. And maybe that was just the particular dudes I dated. Maybe there is that middle ground out there and I just didn't find it. But
right.
It took till my current relationship where I was like, oh, it's equal. This is cool.
Right.
Like, for the most part, okay.
I think it's also just all the stories that we add onto interactions and dynamics. When I was in the church, if I let someone else pay, the story, and I want to be clear here, sorry, there are many people who are—
It's not a church slant.
There are many people who are believers and have different experiences. This is just my little congregation in this part of
and
the
faith
US.
and religion, two different
totally.
things.
And my interpretation, all the things.
Yeah.
And when that would happen, I felt at the time the story was, oh, good, now I know that I can trust him because he will be able to provide and he can protect. And I think, he felt the same, like, okay, I've got to live up to this duty. When in reality, this person I'm thinking about in particular was really struggling paycheck to paycheck, and I wasn't. And there could have been an alternative there, which was just, hey, let's just name where we are right now in the moment. And I support you in becoming who you want to be. And also, like, I can cover this. And it doesn't mean anything against you. It's not to emasculate you. It's also not me trying to be domineering.
It's just to make less stress in life.
Right. And so, and now, I think I would just be like, hey, can we strip away the stories and just like look at the facts of this moment and like, let's decide what works for right now, today. Something as simple as, I actually legitimately forgot my wallet. Can you spot me? And letting that be like just that and not all of the stories on top of it.
Do you have like a crazy breakup story that either you learn from, or do you have one that just is just fodder for people to say, okay, you know what? I'm not there. That didn't happen to me, at least.
Ooh, oh man,
make their 8 feel like a 4, where it's not as stressful.
Some of those for sure. I'm like, do we talk about the ones with restraining orders?
Oh no, it goes that bad.
Yeah.
It goes that. I mean, breakups, it can be such a beautiful thing, and then there's the opposite side of the pendulum. I mean, when you think of the word breakup, like what comes to mind?
Oh, smorgasbord. Because I was in a 4-year relationship, and we went through the Conscious Uncoupling book by Catherine Woodward Thomas. And
there's an actual conscious uncoupling book?
Yes, yeah.
We thought this started at Goop.
Yeah.
We started with the Gwyneth.
So I believe Gwyneth had read Catherine's book and then approached her breakup with the principles. And
She's
then
like the Alan Watts behind the secret. It's like the OG.
Yeah. Okay. That's funny.
Okay. Yes.
So, we followed the principles, and it was, of course, really tender, but it was also so loving and caring, and we're on great terms. We don't speak a lot, but when we do, there's love there. And then on the flip side, there are the breakups that I think, I have to be mindful of the ways that I'm recreating dynamics from my childhood home. And there was a lot of volatility and fighting and switching, kind of like, you're very hot and cold. And that for our family involved a lot of abuse from certain parental figures. And so on one day, you'd be cheery, and then the next day, really, really hostile, very degrading, threatening. And then the next day, you're back to cheerful.
Bipolar tendencies.
Yeah.
Or
it could have been that. That wasn't a diagnosis, but there were other tactics that I would classify differently. But, nonetheless, I ended up meeting and encountering people who modeled the same behavior.
Yeah.
And from a psychology and therapeutic standpoint, I now understand why I did that. But at the time, the breakup, there was so much fear and walking on eggshells. But there was also this sense of like, oh no, I can't repeat what it was like to watch one parent get stuck under the thumb of another parent. And so my kind of avoidance and independence would kick in and be like, I need to get out of here right now.
But that's a great fight or flight, would you say?
Yeah, I would say in those cases, yes.
Yeah. The fact you were able to like not get stuck because you had this thing sort of living at the back of your brain about you'd seen it before.
But it escalated the other person's behavior.
Of course.
To full-on threats of making public claims about my behavior, which were unequivocally untrue, including, things like as if I had been violent in my behavior, which I'm like, if you only were a fly on the wall and you saw me saying no, 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 and being this small, like clearly projections and threats. And then, it was all the claims that led me to really question myself. And I ended up, I had a therapist already, and then I was like, well, maybe I've unknowingly been lying to my therapist and I actually am this monster. I need to get another therapist and lay it out and say, am I this the narcissist, the da-da-da-da-da-da that I've just been called? Please help me.
But that's the effect of deep brainwashing and that's how heavy manipulation can work itself into such a ball where you're like, which is first, the chicken or the egg? What is happening?
Right.
What's up from down in reality? Yeah.
And I know that I'm not perfect. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to go and even talk to previous partners. And so I reached out to a few people who I'm still in touch with and on good terms. And I just said, did you ever experience anything like this from me? If so, I am so sorry. And to hear the feedback so clearly say like, Alyson, you wouldn't even kill the fly in the house. Like you carried the fly outside.
You need the sounding board.
And
the friends and the family as well as other partners where you're like, I've never been called like an unequivocal liar.
Right.
I don't think I'm a liar. I might be an oversharer, but I'm not a liar.
Yeah.
And then getting that feedback of like, oh no, that's the projection of that person.
Yeah. So there was that breakup.
So the darkest of the dark breakups. Yeah.
Yeah. That was one version where I sort of was like so confused about who I was and who I wasn't because I had sort of been broken down over a period of time. Unknowingly. And then there's another really hard breakup, which was I was madly in love with someone and I actually thought this is the first person I can see myself being with forever. And I think there was mutual care both directions. An event happened, which was very much a non-negotiable, but it illuminated that we had some fundamental differences and incompatibilities. And then we thought, oh no, like we thought we were on the same page here and we're not. Therefore, this isn't ultimately going to work. We can't really just try to repair this because we're only going to keep poking at the same.
That was mutual. You both saw that.
We both felt it. But I think at the same time we were like, no, like I thought –
those are the hardest, man.
And I I've never felt grief like that before.
Molecularly changes you.
Truly.
Yeah.
And the insomnia and the fatigue and just the guttural discomfort all day long. And it lasted for months. And I hadn't even been with them as long as I had been with other people. But that showed me right there, like, you can be with someone for a short period and the impact can be.
The power of love is so intense.
Yeah.
I would say those are almost the worst kinds of breakups. It's like the ones that are such deep manipulation that are like, I'm going crazy. It's like,
once it clicks, then you're like, okay, glad to be out of it.
Thank God I've been saved.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the ones that are just truly so deeply sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it lingers. You know, this was last year, and I still almost every day have at least a few passing thoughts of, you know, thinking to reach out, which I don't, or wanting to express something, or just aching for them, or missing. And I know why we are where we are, and I feel solid about that. That's the interesting thing when you're like, no, I have a peace about this decision. We know why we're choosing this, but the feelings of like, oh, it felt so sacred. Also, I think there's something about, I had let certain parts of myself be held in ways that I had never allowed someone to hold me. And so there was a trust that I had never known. And it felt so like reparative to my early childhood home, where I didn't know if someone would ever be there to help soothe the crying child. And so to have a presence, you know, I was like, oh my gosh, I get to finally land, and all my little, you know, inner kiddos got to come out and say, it's safe here. It's safe here. And then
to lose that,
wow, like all the inner kiddos through all the tantrums, and learning to hold myself through that and recognize, like, there's no way I'm going to just go out and try to meet someone else to fill this gap. I really have to hold myself through this. I can seek, you know, friendship and support, but like, I know for health's sake and development's sake, I must go through this grieving process.
And attach that sense of home that you were able to like bounce back off that other person and realize they helped you get there, but ultimately you can house it in your own individual self.
Right.
That's really hard to go.
It is, yeah.
Oh, but it was so much nicer with that other person.
Yeah.
But
because I think I finally had that sense of like, oh, you can just exhale and not be the one holding it all together all the time. And that's honest. But, you know, because I had already been so self-sufficient. And so for the self-sufficient person to decide to depend on someone else. And that's just a part of learning, you know, interdependence and the back and forth give and take of like holding your own self, leaning on others, letting them lean on you, still honoring individuality. I think that's the dance. But
what a lesson, man. That's a big lesson in breakups. Of learning that, like, for anyone that can't step outside of themselves because it's just so hard.
Yeah.
Seeing that's the story you just told is a breakup. And like, what a healthy, layered, communicative, knowledgeable growth, you know, growing the sense of growth in that breakup is people would think a lot of those terms equal a relationship. And that was the fact that was the breakup is like, it can – that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, it can be that perfect and still not be the answer.
Right. Yeah. Part of the gift was in how we moved through it in the end. And also, you know, they're trans and non-binary. And I've been with non-binary people before, trans people before. But our resonance in how we felt the non-binary experience was so it was so precious to have someone who got it in a way that resonated in my own body and being. And so that was another aspect. You know, they helped me see that it was okay to use other pronouns or to express differently. And so I give them, you know, so much credit for helping awaken those
Giving
parts
a part
of me.
of you.
And having that space to share. So I think when there were so many beautiful elements and you still decided not to move forward, it's like that doesn't compute.
Oh, yeah.
But really it served its purpose.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I feel the emotion here now. They're someone who I assume like, oh, I'm just going to love them forever.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It's so lovely to like know that you'll have, I definitely have exes that I just share a lot of love for, and they just live in my head.
Yeah.
And we have a nice little happy family in a weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's mutual for the people that I think so fondly of. I know I live in their head, and it's a really peaceful existence that you're like apart but together, but apart. Yeah.
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 And I think it takes a certain kind of maturity or open-mindedness for the partners after to be able to honor that these are pieces of us or experiences we've had that we don't want to just absolutely reject now that we're in a new relationship. And in fact, they did help mold us. So if this new person loves me, you're gonna in some ways
them too.
Yeah, you're loving pieces of me that became me because of other people. So, I think for me, it's been important to not feel not to change the emotion. If I do naturally feel jealous, then I get to understand, well, why am I feeling insecure or jealous about other beautiful things that have happened to my partner? And to leave room if they say, hey, like it's a different structure now. We're really like just friends, or this is how we communicate, for there to be space for that. I know that a lot of people prefer like hard lines. I've found that the more I can personally tolerate uncertainty, ambiguity, and I have a sense of self, then it's easier for me to also extend that to other people.
That's really well put. Yeah, I think we grew up with hard lines. Mm-hmm. And so that's just really hard.
And that equals safety.
And that equals safety.
And we all know, since we have gone through breakups, that doesn't automatically mean forever security.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know there's such a big conversation right now about non-binary in not just dating but society. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like what are your thoughts on that in terms of dating? Like, do you feel like it's a lesson that, like you said, almost propels you into just a really authentic conversation with other people, or how, like, what are your thoughts on non-binary terms in dating compared, coming from assuming you're educating someone that isn't familiar with that? Yeah.
Well, of course, I cannot speak for every non-binary human. For me, because it involved a lot of deconstructing, I landed in just a generally more spacious place of being human, how I express, how I understand myself and other people. And so I've found that typically when you're interacting with someone who's non-binary, they also have contended with things and therefore land in a, at least in my experience, more spacious place. For me, that ends up making dating non-binary people way more playful and fun because you feel a little less restricted, a little more liberated when it feels, safe to express who you are.
Just a lot more maybes and anything's, there's no no's necessarily. It's like, let's just share.
Yeah. And people, of course, like, will have their preferences and their hard lines of like, absolutely, that does not feel like me, or I would never do that in a relationship, or, physical expression or whatever. But I'm like, I identify the term as pansexual. So that means I will date people of all identities. I've been with, straight cis men, and there's an argument there around if they're dating queer people. There's a conversation there to be had, but I've been with trans people, I've been with women, and so I feel pretty just like open to really wanting to know who are you, and also from like a physical attraction standpoint, there is no through line to the people I've been with. Like, and I shared this with someone else the other day. Like, I've been with people who are 4'11". I've been with people who are 6'7".
Right.
I've been with people who have every, complexion, every, version of upbringing.
Is there
single
a through
parent
line in personality?
No.
Not even that?
Not
No?
even that.
No?
And now that I have, I think, a clearer sense of my own selfhood, there probably from here will be
Okay.
clearer through lines. Like, okay, I don't need to experiment from scratch now. So I'm looking for shared values and things of that nature. But in my 20s, I was like, I don't know who I am yet. So maybe the way you see the world is worth getting to know. But yeah, so generally speaking, dating someone who's non-binary, you might find it might almost be like when I've been with a woman who is used to having to perform
Right.
a certain kind of seductress, and I'm like, oh, you can do that. And yes, you look sexy. Yes. Also, just so you know, you don't have to. And I'm not going to think that you're less attractive.
Right.
In fact, like I might even feel more attracted to you when you know that you, without makeup, without trying, and you're like,
there's an honesty and purity of what the actual attraction is.
Yeah. And again, I know that like I just have to always say, the caveat is like, of course, there are men who also feel this way, or there are other people who are not non-binary who feel this way. But you find tendencies. So I say, as long as you know how to honor someone's non-binary identity and you feel educated and integrated in the community, if you meet someone and you're attracted to them and they're non-binary, like I think it can be a really beautiful, liberating experience.
Do you find there's certain just glaring spots where, for lack of a better term, like work still needs to be done? Like, do you find that how do I even say that? Like,
from society or from the non-binary person?
No, from society. Like where there's something that's not being seen, or maybe, like a cis straight man is not being exposed. Like often I find it's just unfamiliarity. And
Totally.
Unfamiliarity leads to fear.
Yeah.
And it's like unfamiliarity and fear are the most committed relationship ever.
Yeah.
And as soon as something just becomes familiar, then it becomes more normal. And all of a sudden this fear is not so fearful. It's like, huh.
Yeah.
Even if it's not even just full acceptance, at least there's a huh involved.
Yeah. I think you're naming it. And just to build off of it briefly is, okay, then approach it with curiosity. Can you just listen to learn and seek to understand before expecting your current view to be understood? And I had never even been around a queer community until my 20s. So yes, lack of exposure and also a lot of homophobia. Like I was like, nervous that queerness was contagious, and if I were around too many people, they'd be a quote unquote bad influence. And, now, of course, being integrated in the queer community and seeing just how loving and safe and inclusive they are because we've felt, what it's like to be ostracized or, rejected from your own home.
They've had to ask really hard questions that are some of them a much, much earlier age.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. If you don't have, any direct experiences with non-binary people or gender nonconforming, trans people in your life, like that might be something to really make an intentional effort. Even if it's just reading literature from trans authors, you will see like, or reading, queer poetry, like you will get to see the world in so many different ways just because you're exposing yourself to new perspectives.
Right. There was a Sundance documentary this year. I think it's called Will and Harper, and Will Ferrell's best friend of, I think, many decades. I have not seen it yet. Came out to him as trans, and they went on a road trip together to talk about it.
Oh, fun.
And it had like an 8-figure deal that it sold at Sundance.
Wow.
And it's like, who would have guessed that Will Ferrell, out of all people, a cis white man comedian in his, I think, 50s. And it's, the most interesting forays into quote unquote mainstream or just educating more people. And I had mixed feelings of, a movie star selling for 8 figures at Sundance a movie star at the heart of it. But really the heart of it's his best friend. But he was the catalyst. And I thought, no, I think there's, funny ways that people can be educated, the most unexpected of ways. And I thought that was such a really, Will Ferrell's a beloved, such a Central American actor, such a central character. And I thought, oh, that's a great way to quote unquote expose. That's such a not the right word, but just introduce.
Right.
And just
totally
lay down a different kind of story that maybe people wouldn't necessarily find. And I thought that's what made it so powerful. And that's why I thought it was such a lovely idea that the director and Will Ferrell and his best friend, Harper, chose to put it on camera.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. So
I haven't seen it either.
I don't know the context.
I think that maybe it was just such a nice mixture of familiarity and unfamiliarity that has piqued so many people's interest.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really a beautiful way. I was like, never saw that coming.
Right.
But that's cool.
Well, and also, so if you look at media representation of trans people in particular, typically, historically, they've been portrayed as either like perpetrators and criminals.
Sex workers. Yes.
Which, of course, happens for people of all identities as a livelihood and for a variety of reasons. But also there's usually kind of a negative connotation in how they're portrayed or what the storyline is, or they're portrayed as like deceitful because they're parading as quote unquote one gender, but really they are quote unquote another gender. And in reality, if you only have those negative storylines, then of course, if you encountered a trans person, you're going, wait, are they going to be like this image that's been, given to me? So to see just like trans joy and
a road trip.
A road trip and normal life circumstances and moving through the world, not through the lens of trauma or something that's negative, but in wholesome and reverent ways is just so important.
Just a friendship.
Yeah, it's so important. And I didn't really get that, I think, until I would talk to some of my friends who are Black, brown, and they would share all of the auditions that they go on and how like a percentage of them are, okay, here I am being someone who's incarcerated again. Here I am being, perceived, or my friend, it was like 3 auditions in a week where they were playing an enslaved person. And meanwhile, of course, none of my auditions have anything to do with having to be so overtly racialized and historical, like so many more opportunities for white people to just play a variety of characters in a variety of circumstances. And so, it was like, no, this is 2024 and it's still just as important to be demonstrating all of these normal, healthy, loving circumstances for people of all identities, all embodiments, because we still have a long way to go.
Right.
A lot of unlearning. I think the other aspect of this too is like people sometimes when we're raised, we assume that however it is when we were raised is how it's always been. And in reality, like our depiction of queer people, of gender, of XYZ is actually still very contextualized in this era, in this region of the world, in this version of society. We could hop, skip, and jump over, 2,000 miles somewhere else, and manhood, womanhood, being two-spirit, XYZ.
2024 is a completely different definition.
Right. So I think it's just important to remember things that we hold on as like absolute truths might actually be more flexible and contextual than our brains are, believing them to be.
Travel's important, kids.
For real.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what do you hope, because this is an uncoupling podcast, what do you hope for your future? Are you looking for another relationship, or do you find it's important that that's not how you view life? Like, what is your next path? For anyone going through a breakup, some people like to know, there doesn't have to be a next necessarily.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But what are your thoughts on that?
In my personal learning and development journey, relationship-wise, I knew after my last breakup being just so full of grief that I was going to need time. And I did meet someone months later, and it was important for me to recognize that I didn't want to rush anything. And so my practice has been, how slow and steady can we go and really get to know, take all of the lessons you've previously learned and really apply them while, of course, honoring the individuality of this, the new dynamic. And take your time with how you open your heart, with the time that you offer them, with the energy you allocate throughout your week to, all the little special get-togethers or gestures and messages. And for me, being as slow as a snail has been really important, because I can check in more frequently and say, like, is this still feeling aligned? And if not, to know that the option doesn't have to just be flip the switch on or off. It can be, okay, no, I just need more time to get to know them. Or, okay, I'm realizing they might actually be a really great friend, but not partner. And to just, have space to hold things. I call it, I learned from a mentor, holding tightly loosely, where you're like, I'm giving this enough weight to apply some thought towards it, but I'm also like willing to let it go and to know that I'm going to be okay no matter what.
Yeah.
So
tightly and loosely is really interesting.
Yeah.
My best friend has a quote that says, you can have level 10 friends and you can have level 2 friends. Level 2 is not worse than level 10. There's just a range of what you can expect from certain people. And if you do get something out of someone and there's a reason that you want them around in any capacity, that's okay too. It doesn't have to be a level 10 or a level 2. Yeah. Both are okay in their own respects.
And also the expectations we put on ourselves to offer other people time. Like, I sometimes am with someone who is an acquaintance and I'm perpetually trying to give 10 out of 10.
Oh, interesting.
I'm like, when I do that for every single person all day long, there's not much left for anything else. So I guess I'm learning, boundaries and pacing, and also to cherish the slow burn of it. It's helped me be so present talking to this new person and just like reveling in 1 inch instead of trying to go a full mile. And I also realize, like, we're on the same page in terms of we don't need to be with someone for forever. And so there's a lot of alignment just like philosophically. And
allowing that presence.
Yeah. We can still be fully present when we're together, and that doesn't have to have all of the other stories added onto it. So far, it's beautiful and lovely, but it just feels way more grounded. So I think that's moving forward. I just feel a little bit
emulate.
Yeah, I just feel a little bit more grounded and settled, and like I don't want to be blown with the wind so much. I feel older, honestly. I'm like 30s.
This is what it feels like.
Kind of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
24 hours a day gets to be yours. I think that's such a beautiful gift. And when this world can be really crazy and push you in different directions, it's like I get to decide everything about my day.
Yeah.
And that's pretty wild.
Really is.
And
a lot
what
of decisions.
A lot of decisions involved in that too.
Yeah.
But deciding whether to do something or not do something, it's a gift, not a burden to live just to me. And that's not everybody gets that.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like you get to craft exactly. No one else will be involved in what you're trying to build or navigate.
Yeah.
And that can be really empowering.
Yeah. And I still have stuff to figure out in terms of like my attachment style, and it'll always be easier for me to just be like, it's okay, just in case I need to be self-sufficient, because you never know when someone's going to leave. Like, I know that about myself. So I have to choose when I open up to also not go the opposite direction and say, well, I opened up, so shouldn't we know that this is going to be certain every time from here on out?
Right.
So like, it's my exercise and practice to learn that interdependence and to do it in a way that's really human and not expecting another person to be able to do more than what a human
Hold on
can
forever.
do. Yeah. Like just honoring what it is, learning acceptance, how to let go when you need to let go. And embracing the grief of it, not trying to run away from the grief, I think is important for me right now.
Those are some very good breakup lessons. I appreciate you coming on and just sharing with people and giving so many different dynamics to relationships. I think people are going to take a lot away from that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
If nothing else, you're not alone in not knowing what you're doing.
We're all just here trying to figure it out.
Yes.
I would say that's your words of wisdom.
Okay.
What would you say your words of wisdom? If you could encapsulate a words of wisdom for the uncouplers out there.
Oof. Specifically for uncoupling?
Yes,
or
for
just
someone
relationships?
going through a breakup or recovering from a breakup.
Oof. Well, it's always going to be so specific to that person's experience. I would encourage the mantra, seek first to understand before expecting to be understood.
Seek first to understand
before expecting to be understood.
That's a really good one.
Simply so we're not just trying to wait till someone's done talking so we can prove why we were right or that our view of the scenario was the only view. Uncoupling is complicated. And if you have the ability to be in communication with someone safely, then, if possible, I have another one actually that might be even better. But if possible, you want to be able to hear each other. The other one, which I believe is from Conscious Uncoupling,
by
Catherine Woodward Thomas.
Catherine Woodward Thomas.
This is my paraphrase because it was in my memory, years ago. But essentially, the way you start your next relationship depends on the way that you chose to end the previous one. And there's something about like really sitting with the lessons and applying them so you don't just go out and repeat the same old dynamic again and again. So, how you get into the next thing actually starts with how you end the previous one.
If you seek to understand.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, if that's a misquote, then you can put that quote on me and not Catherine.
It's just Alyson saying that quote.
Yeah, right. I'm like, that's what I took from it.
Well said. Thanks for watching Uncoupling, and we have a Patreon. Check us out on Patreon and whenever you get your podcasts. Uncoupling Podcast is produced by Stampede Ventures, Jason R. Ellis, and Holland Roden.